I'd like to start off the question period and congratulate you both for excellent presentations, but just challenge you a bit on the politics part, because I think that there's some missing components. The first question I would ask is, it seems that maybe part of the way that engineers can get involved earlier is become part of the policy process and the political process. And in this room, there might be 3 or 4 engineers maximum that I know of that have actually ever been a part of a political party policy process. But each party does have its own mechanism through its riding associations, through its policy conferences, and through a variety of techniques. So I guess my question would be, you suggest, Ms. Wallace, that earlier involvement is key. And if you take a look back, you said that the government was committed to the elimination of coal-fired plants in 2008, but actually the commitment was made in 2002, as you know. Bobby Kennedy arrived here from the U.S., challenged Canadians to get aboard the coal-fired plants. Dalton McGuinty in opposition proposed it. It was a key election decision in 2003. 2006, PEO actually sponsored a policy conference on energy, invited the government. There was some involvement, asked for more involvement, radio silence. A new minister comes in 2008, an activist minister, George Smitherman. At the same time, you had a growing Green Party vote that was trying to be addressed. You had an NDP leadership convention where the perceived winner was an environmentalist, Peter Taverns. And I think what happens is the government was trying to get out ahead of the curve on that specific issue in time for the NDP convention, because it was introduced, the Green Energy Act, the week before that convention. And I think what I take from all your words is storytelling, assessing risks, getting in front and behind, getting in front and behind the scenes, having to get out in front and play in traffic. I love that expression. I think the key takeaway that I take from this session, and I hope I'd be interested in your response, is as long as engineers only wait for their input and sit silently in the silent profession and don't get involved actually in riding associations and political nomination meetings and political party policy conventions, they're still going to operate outside the system. What's your thought?
I think your point is well taken around the
Can't hear you.
politics.
Hello? I was told not to lean in. Okay. I think your point is well taken around the politics, and I guess I would say there's 2 streams of places you need to get involved. If you want to shape the agenda, what gets done, it's definitely on the politics side. And but I would say that in my experience working on a lot of high-profile government flagship legacy kind of agenda items, whether it's the minister's pet project or the premier's commitment or whatever, they rarely tell you how to do it. They tell you what to do, and they tell you when to get it done, but they rarely tell you how to do it. So if you want to influence what gets done, you got to go political. If you want to influence how it's done, and I think engineers care a lot about that as well, that's where you need to get involved early with the public service. So I would say not every engineer I've met is well suited to navigate in the political space, and so maybe that there's a bit of a divide and conquer here, and I think that some of your membership really should play in the political realm and have the long-term vision and what should be driving the agenda. But there's also a huge opportunity that I think is often a missed opportunity for engineers to get involved in the technical building on the how, because they, in my experience, they leave that to the bureaucrats to figure out.
So can you share with us specifics of how do you get in the how? Now, I can tell you what we did is we and OCEPP both made presentations to the hearings on the Green Energy Act, but it was after the legislation was already introduced, and it was at a last minute. They both got spots in Sault Ste. Marie, both encouraged, the government to expand their agenda on conservation, but didn't get into the detail. So despite the fact there was years of opportunity, literally a 7-year period of this government, at least 6-year, there was never any opportunity to input at the bureaucratic level or at the political level. So how specifically can engineers get involved at the bureaucratic level if that's what you're suggesting?
Well, I would say partly it's networks. It's around being at the table when government is trying to figure things out, being receptive to help, it sort of goes both ways. People are human. They go back to the same people they know that they talked to last time. That's always where we start. And then we broaden out to see who else we should be talking to. So building those relationships long-term between associations and the ministries that are driving the agenda that you're interested in, I think is part of it. Ministry of Environment, for example, has everything we do, we post on the Environmental Bill of Rights. We rarely get engineering feedback to those pieces. We rarely get municipal feedback to those pieces, but yet I would argue those two audiences would have a lot of the technical know-how around implications. It's just not a space that typically that's the vehicle that environmental organizations use to watchdog and pay attention. That's what the registry was built for, and largely how it gets used. But so I would say looking to the I challenge government internally to do a more collaborative and reach out to audiences we don't typically do, but you can't always wait to be asked. You got to look to find where are these conversations happening, and then invite yourself into the conversation. Because I think that what happens is when interesting ideas, when challenging ideas get put back to government, we do follow up. We do want to dive deeper. It's just sometimes it's not even knowing who to talk to and how to do it. And I've worked in a lot of policy contexts where there are no engineers working in policy. So no one thinks to talk to the engineers because there are no engineers on the floor. And where I'm working now, we have a much more of a mix between engineering and policy. So we're reaching out to different people because the staff have different networks. So I do think it's about getting in the face of the decision makers and the parts of the organization you want to have an influence on, and going to the way they traditionally reach out and trying to get your message heard so that you are one of the go-tos. So it isn't just the 5 or 6 environmental organizations that everybody knows of that get called first.
Great. I'll give you my card now. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I have a two-part question.
You weren't kidding.
No, Howard, no, I'm kidding. I have a two-part question, and first one's to you, Marcia. Over here. I understand the government's need to move faster on things, and we all understand or like the idea of less approval processes and having to go through less approval processes. I'm sure many engineers have had to fill out all the forms for the Ministry of the Environment. But if I'm to understand what you were saying about the process that you went through correctly, in deciding to get rid of all those levels of approval, you simply made it happen, that there would only be one approval process. And so all those other agencies and governments and civil interest groups that used to be involved in all these discussions before an approvals were done were basically left out of even the decision of whether there was only going to be one approval process. First of all, I'd like you to clarify that, whether that was what happened, whether the government just put in one modernized approval process without going to the stakeholders to find out if they were okay with that. And so I'd like to know, is that what happened? And if so, how's that working out for you? And then my second part of my question is to Pamela. And as the academic, I was wondering if you could grade the government on that kind of process, if you are aware of the Green Energy Act and any of the ramifications that have come out of it.
Maybe I'll just answer that directly. I also am a former public servant, so I would not
So just be an easy
I would
grader.
never grade a government on any of its performance.
I would say, so first of all, the Renewable Energy Act or the Renewable Energy Approval and the piece that the Ministry of Environment was involved in, it did collapse a number of approval processes. It only affected, well, primarily it was the provincial piece How do we look at all the different places that we're issuing decisions and try and think about it more integrated as the Crown or as one level of government, one process. But we were given some political starting points. One was municipalities would not get a decision, and that was the most controversial part of that whole process. And I think one that after the throne speech, the government signaled that they want to take another look at. But it was a controversial starting place, and I think what was able to drive the pace of change in terms of implementation of the program in a way that didn't happen in other provinces, but also at a higher public controversy expense than that. In terms of whether or not there was consultation and whether it all happened, there were public meetings, there were workshops, there was technical scientists who came in for all-day technical discussions around standard setting. There was interministry discussions. There was lots that happened. It just happened in a very compressed time frame. In the case of green energy, it happened in a matter of few months. So and I guess it goes to the question raised earlier in terms of how do you get in early, if people made themselves known or they were already known to government, they were part of that conversation. And if you missed the public meeting in your municipality, then you kind of missed your opportunity because it was happening that fast. And that part's unusual. We're not often given such a short agenda of such magnitude of change so quickly. But from a process perspective, it did follow all the steps of public policy making. It just happened in a ridiculously short time. I think that there is, and I guess that's why not everything happens at that pace. And so sometimes doing the work, I forget the word you used, Pamela, but around the policy work, workup, is really, really important because when you're asked to move that quickly, when the window opens, if you have to write it from scratch, it's never that good. What you're really looking to is everything. The first thing we do when we get those kind of timelines is, okay, what do we know? What have we ever done? And I have seen projects continue to move forward where people have worked away, or a stakeholder or a influence group has worked away on something, and they see the opportunity and they hold it up. So I think that if there are issues that the engineering profession cares about strongly, even if it's not the window now, developing a clear position, doing the homework, creating the evidence so that when the window does open, you've got something to walk in the door with, can be very influential in the conversation, especially in rapid situations, because there's no time for someone to invent a great answer. If I'm faced with two people, one person who's got a great evidence-based paper can sit down and explain to me, or the sector can come in with lots of detail, and the other one's like, can I have another 3 months to put something together? I'll say, sure, work on it, but I can't stop. So I'm gonna listen to the one who's got the evidence. So any work you can do in advance on things that matter, it's not work lost. And even inside government, you have staff who may work on something for a while, it doesn't go forward, government changes, opportunities shift, and all of a sudden that thing that was a total dog 5 years ago is the most important thing happening in that branch later. So you never know. It's never lost work. It's about how to clearly articulate, keep the evidence fresh, and be ready when the opportunity comes.
I'd just like to comment, because I think that's a great answer to the previous question as well. And I think the point you raised about networks and building relationships, that's how you, building relationships across, that's how you're in the loop. That's how you know things are coming up. That's how you have an opportunity, even if for some reason the government doesn't want to talk to you, but are talking to someone else, then you have an opportunity to influence in kind of a third-party way. So it's the building the relationships for the longer term, so that you have an opportunity to come in at the right phase of the cycle and hopefully be influential.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dave Adams, my name, from Professional Engineers Ontario. I was very interested and want to thank you two ladies for your presentations this morning. I'd like to go back to the very first slide on the landscape, or close to the first slide. And as you know, we're suffering through the lack of generation of wealth in this province. There's two types of consumption and so on. There's the generation of wealth and there's the consumption of wealth. And you've explored today very well refining the consumption with methods and so on. I want to know, is the government doing anything about examining all the technologies that we have remaining? We know we've abandoned manufacturing and so on, but are you studying to see where we could generate wealth so that we could undertake the renewal of the Gardiner Expressway and the blockage of sewers and everything else that's happening throughout the province? I didn't see any discussion of a government initiative to generate wealth. I wondered if you could explain that, please.
You want to try?
This may not address your specific concern, but I would think, and I'm not in government, so I'm not speaking for government, but certainly my reading of the recent budget, Ontario budget, is that there's actually a multi-year plan for instance, infrastructure investment. There's a commitment for R&D investment.
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's
you know,
still
so
consumption.
I would
isn't it?
think. Pardon me.
Still consumption when you're building more infrastructure and improving this and that. I'm talking about all the industries that exist now and the 101 or many more new technologies. Who's investigating how we might pick up some of those to replace the income generation and the employment of engineers and so on, and all of the mass of people in this province?
Yeah, well, you may argue with me, but I would think that would be the thinking, the policy thinking behind those sorts of initiatives that are in the budget. But in fact, many would, on manufacturing, many would say that let's reinvest in manufacturing economy in Ontario. And there are, there's research and debates around that as well.
But I don't see a whole lot of action.
I think that also goes to how you communicate the question, because it's hard for government to get its head around why that would be what they should focus on. But if you can tie that new technology to solve a problem that someone has, then all of a sudden people are listening. So we spend money on research and innovation, and we work to nurture as a government new technologies, new companies, startups. We talk about it at the Ministry of Environment, how to foster innovation, how to think about what we do in a way that doesn't deter economic competitiveness and what's happening.
Right.
But those are all like way up here. They're hard for anyone to grasp. You connect something specifically to a specific problem, now everyone's listening.
Yeah, I would like to see you look at all the various companies that are still in existence and apply new technology. A lot of them are into new technology, and see where they could go with the pathway cleared a little bit by the government. Thank you.
We're going to have to just make it very short. Last two questions, keep it short. Try to answer, she's got to get it. Oh, you're clear up for lunch?
Yes.
Hi, Paul Lacchioni again from OCEPP. I just want to clarify any misunderstandings about this Green Energy Act. We've had some real excellent cooperation with the Energy Ministry, and they've hooked us up to the agencies involved and some of the key players in the actual ministries, the ADMs and their staff. So the last couple of years, we've had some great cooperation, and a number of the changes that you've seen in the last 2 years on the FIT program and the ones that were announced recently were the result of a detailed study that we did about wind. And they will listen if you tell them why it won't work. The problem is they gave us a bit of a curveball, because we were talking to them when they announced the phase out of coal, and we told them in Ontario we have lots of nuclear and hydraulic. It's a different grid than the rest of the world. It would be a lot easier for us to just convert the existing coal plants to gas, because they're going to be peakers anyway. It doesn't matter if they're not efficient. And that would be a lot faster route, much cheaper. And then in the middle of all this, the economy in the world collapsed. The government wanted to get green jobs coming out of their yin-yang, and suddenly 10,000 megawatts of very high-cost power comes online, which the grid can't handle. And we tried to tell them we can't handle it in Ontario. And they kept telling us it works in the United States, in China, and in Europe, so it'll work here. We say, Ontario is not the same. Our grid is different. And they wouldn't listen. So we had to go away and do that 2-year study, come back, and then they listen. So the problem is when you rush to change a very complex engineering system, and for the record, the grid is the most complex engineering system in the world. There's nothing bigger and more complex. And in 1 year, you can't make a 90-degree turn and change the entire grid system, as they've discovered, as you probably know. Mm-hmm. And you know, in September, we start dispatching wind and solar. They're going to be shutting these things down after we paid for them. So we've embedded into the process now a system that costs $2 billion more every year to run, and it was unnecessary. But I'm not criticizing what happened because I understand the politics of jobs in the middle of a recession and all the rest of it. How do you get ahead of a 90-degree sharp turn? I'm not sure there's an answer, but.
Well, and I think it goes back to you've got to play in both arenas. You play in the politics space around where the 90-degree turns happen or try to avoid them, but you also play once you understand that decision had been made, that this government wanted green jobs and we were going to have wind turbines all over the landscape because that's what we want. Then being part of you know, the point I made earlier around you could be right and it's still the wrong answer. So. Maybe years from now you'll just take solace in that you were right, but in the meantime, how do we make what we have work? I still think there's a space for a technical engineering advice and influence in that thinking.
And we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's time well spent.
Can we just go to the last question? Just keep it short, one quick short commentary.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Eric Jelinski here. I've been involved in the power industry for almost 4 decades. I second everything that Paul Acchione has said. In fact, he sort of stole my sales. But I've been writing, and let the record show, I've been writing to the Minister of Energy since 2009, almost every week sometimes, and never had a response. But I guess I'm happy to hear that we finally rounded the corner of this 90-degree turn and we're getting somewhere. So I applaud that part of it. Now, I would like to know what advice you actually would give me for, you know, writing a letter a week. What else could be done to get the attention of the minister?
Well, I think that, Pamela, you might have ideas here too, but I think that the professions have a way to have influence on the conversation that the average citizen doesn't. So the letter writing is what I would do. Madam, I'm my local counselor and a recent action she's taken, and I'll write a letter and I'll be really upset, and maybe she'll respond, maybe she won't, but at least I'll feel better that I said it. But I think professions have a way to engage in the conversation at a different level, at a way of collectively being a stronger voice than an individual. And I think you need to leverage that so that as a profession, it's a proposal for an idea, it's evidence to bring to the conversation, it's a willingness to be at the table, and you get to influence decision-making in a different way than you would as an individual. It doesn't necessarily mean it's more important, because if you get enough people mad about an issue, they can completely make that 90-degree turn happen. I've seen that happen lots of times, but you do have an opportunity when you come together as a collective, as a profession, and the credibility that engineering can bring to that conversation. I wouldn't underestimate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree with that. I personally don't think letter writing is that influential in terms of ministerial decision making, but certainly your ability to work with others and influence public opinion on whatever the topic is enormously powerful. So maybe some more of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Pamela and